What is going on, everybody? McLean's Speed Shop World Champion coming at you, and we're here back on RP Law, but with a very different style of video. I mean, not super different versus some of the in-depth guides that we've done in the past, back in like OP05 and stuff like that, but that was more so breaking down leaders. Now, we're going to break down the deck itself, because RP Law is going to become more and more popular as things get going, and especially EB01. At the time of recording, this drops this Friday, upcoming Friday, May 3rd. So that is going to change the landscape of the game and begin RP Law's rise. And then once we get to OP07, RP Law becomes one of the best decks in the game, arguably the best deck in the game based on current results and stuff coming out of Japan, with its pretty solid win rate and everything like that. So we got to break things down though. And yeah, we're going to jump into a guide. I'm going to break down a bunch of different things here. So let's kick things off with the leader. So RP Law, most of you already know, but just in case anyone new, because again, a lot of people will be jumping out of RP Law here pretty soon as the rise starts popping off with the EB01 set and then OP07 right after that. So let's get into Law's ability. So the reason why Law is so good is because Law's leader ability lets you get rid of 3 Dawn, and then you're able to summon an extra character. So basically, depending on how you combine things, you can bring out up to 2 characters a turn. But the reason why this is so strong is, and anyone that's new, the 3 Dawn can be from anywhere on your field. That's where it really unlocks a lot of combinations. It does not have to be in your Dawn zone. It does not have to be active. It doesn't have to be rested. It can be anything. It can be attached to characters. If you want to put 3 Dawn on Zoro and attack for 8k and then use your leader Law's ability, you can do that. You can then minus the 3 off in Zoro that you attach to him after attacking for 8k, and then bring in any character that's cost 4 or lower from your hand. So those are the things, especially anyone that's new, I want to make sure you know that's how the leader ability works. Again, Dawn from anywhere on your field. It does not matter where it is, how you sequence it. You can attack first, or do whatever, and you just play around that. That's where sort of all the combinations and stuff, and really where things open up when a lot of your own personal decision making can then affect a match, depending on how you use and when you use leader Law's ability. But besides that, the best thing about RP Law and why I think it's the best deck in the game is because it fits literally, you can build around any play style you want, whether that's aggro, whether it's control, if you want to play super defensive, literally anything you're able to do with Law, and that's why it's super awesome. At least what I think. And you can just hit so many fun combos with your different characters. Once you get something figured out, you're just able to do, it opens up so much different things, and it's really, really cool and a ton of fun when you're able to chain things together. But yeah, so let's jump into what I refer to as the core of the deck. If you watched any of the previous videos, or even in comments and stuff or questions, in my honest opinion, outside of the core of the deck, the core is the cards you have to have, that I think, at least in my opinion, is the staple of this deck, kind of the main core identity of the deck. And then outside of that is where the creativity comes into play, so we'll get into that as well. So yeah, let's jump into the core of the deck and get into all that. Alright, so when you've heard me talk about the core of the deck, these are the cards that I mean are the staple cards that after EB01 drops you have to have. And I will get into the specifics here and stuff like that. We'll just kind of go down the row. But Kid and Killer, you need Kid and Killer because it's just one of the best cards in the game, honestly. It's so good. Kid and Killer's ability is, it allows you to, if you time things right and your opponent has 2 or less life, you get an extra 2,000 power when attacking. So that's just 7k. And when you're going up and setting, again, off the leader ability, you're trying to set up the endgame finishers, you're able to attack with so much and then still use leader ability. Bring in Kid and Killer, who are then going to be attacking for a 7k minimum as you go for game, or just any point of the game if your opponent is at 2 life or less. And it's so strong. It just really opens up so many combos that you're able to do to like finish out games and stuff. And the only like again counter I can think of for the rush characters really just they don't have counter, so that's like the only con. But this is a staple card for me that you have to have 4 of going forward. And yeah, it's just also alt art is like my personal favorite like art in the entire game. I just love it. Everybody's dripped out. It's so cool. They look sick with the kid killer and then like heat in the background. It's really, really cool. I love it. But yeah, besides that, this is now going to become one of the core cards that I refer to, and then let's jump into Max and Gordon. Alright, so Max and Gordon is where things it's like where things can kind of vary, but you still need to have minimum for whether you're new or been playing. You either already have your Gordons and then you can decide on the maxes, or if you're new you have to get the maxes, because unfortunately Gordons are very expensive, like and probably will get more and more expensive because they're just a promo, and that's one of the most annoying things about the deck is just the obscure cards that work with the deck. Are a couple of them are very hard to get. But the pros of Max and Gordon, why they're a staple, why they're part of the core, is for 1 cost, you get a minus 3,000 power. And with how strong Law is between the early and mid game, normally like turns 2 through 4, being able to use Max and Gordon is going to put any of your opponent's characters pretty much in range for you to be able to get them off the field and then bring in another character. And it's super, super efficient, especially with the arrival of EB01, because you can now combo Max and Gordon with like Bond Clay. So if you need to drop a Bond Clay, you're at 4 Don, drop Bond Clay, you get the 1, and then you can bring in Gordon or Max, because it just really opens up a lot of things. Overall, I think you have to run, for me, of all the stuff of testing, you don't need to run 8. You feel like the minimum is 6. So if especially if price is an issue, I'd say if you can, definitely get the 4 maxes and get, like, if you can, 2 Gordons. If money is a super big issue to you, we'll get to that kind of in the end here with some options you can do outside of Gordon. It does make it a little tough because, again, this is the most optimal. Like, at the core of the deck, these are the most optimal cards that you kind of have to get. But overall, though, for me, playtesting and everything, feel like the minimum you need is 6. You don't really need 8, so you can go like 6, 7, 8, anywhere in there. And it's felt, at least for me, pretty good. I see them a decent amount. But yeah, Max and Gordon, staple of our removal, being able to make sure we can keep board control and keep kind of control of the game. Alright, then into one of the new cards dropping in EB01 that is now a staple is Bond Clay. Bond Clay is nuts because Bond Clay gives you an active Don when you bring in, and why Bond Clay is so strong and super, super good is because Bond Clay gives you like the Don without any kind of conditions. You just drop Bond Clay, you get an active Don. So that means you can drop Bond Clay first, get the active Don, then use the leader ability and bring in anyone else, versus like some of the other like ramp characters, we'd have to drop a character first and then bring them in off in the ramp. Bond Clay, you drop, gives the active Don, and again you can hit the combos with Max and Gordon. And the other reason why Bond Clay is so strong is Bond Clay's when attacking ability gets to become the power of any of your opponent's characters, and against a lot of the matchups coming up against yellow, especially like black, yellow, Luffy, any of the yellow decks, NL Katakuri that play those like boss monsters, also any of the decks that drop like Moria, stuff like that, Bond Clay, if he's still on the field the next turn, gets to become the attacking power of any of those characters. So you're playing Katakuri, they drop Big Mom, Bond Clay, your next turn is going to be a 12k attacker. It's nuts. And Bond Clay is a yellow deck killer, and also just super strong against black, yellow, Luffy, because gets to become, again, if they get out the Moria, Bond Clay's in 9k, and then if they're boosted up to 9k, Bond Clay's going to be attacking minimum 9k, which really helps you out in those situations. And also, Bond Clay is technically a pseudo blocker, because if you attack with Bond Clay, becomes rested, he's going to be 1k. Your opponent has to attack him to get rid of him. If your opponent leaves Bond Clay on the field, that's a huge mistake for them, because it's such a strong card, and it can take advantage of any of their like boss cards by just mirroring it. So that's kind of like the con of it, though. is it does become 1k, so it is very, very hard to defend. If you don't have any blockers or anything up, you're pretty much just going to lose him after one attack. And then also, too, if you're playing pretty aggressive with the board control, Bon Clay won't be able to, like, again, become super high. So if you're wiping up the board, Bon Clay just gets stuck as the 1k. But outside of that, the Don ramp is just what makes this card, like, a must-have. Alright, and then on to basically the heart of this deck, which is the Kid blocker. So the 5-cost blocker, 6k power. This card is pretty much the staple. It's like the heart of your setups, depending on what you're doing. You want to get this card set up, and it just pretty much does everything. Kid gives you the active Don, so you're going to get an extra Don back whenever you use your ability, because whenever you send a Don card back from the field, you get an active Don back. So not only does that help not make the -3s off and leader ability like as bad, you get an active Don back, which means you can then use it for attacking more or keeping up any kind of like defense and stuff you may have. And it's a 6k blocker, which is super, super strong in the yellow matchups, because again, a lot of the yellow decks want to drop those boss cards, and when the yellow decks drop their boss cards, that means their later attack is only going to be for 5k. So if they do that and you have a 6k blocker up like Kid, it's just a free block. You don't have to lose any cards from your hand. And then the only kind of cons around Kid is just, again, it's 5 costs, so you can't bring it off leader ability, so you do need to prep around that, because if you play too aggressive early, you may not be able to bring Kid in, which could be a problem. And yeah, just make sure you have the Don to be able to bring him in. Recommended, again, trying to play and set up for like the 6 Don range, because then you can be able to do a lot of stuff there. But yeah, Kid is the main staple of this deck, and kind of has been for a while, honestly. It's just been just one of the key clutch cards. Alright, and then on to one of the cards that came out in OP06, the 4-cost Reiju, which really pretty much bails this deck out with our main issue, which is burning out of cards in hand. Because if you're using Law's ability, you're playing 2 cards from your hand a turn, basically. Potentially 3, depending on if you're dropping a character, using Gordon Max, and then bring in another character. So if you get a little too hot and overheat, you can super burn out of cards in hand, which means you then can't play any kind of defense, and your opponent could like hand starve you and pick apart your field, and then before they attack. But the day is now saved if you get Ray during the game. Pretty much, normally if you get 1 or 2 in any game, it bails you out of any kind of play style. Whether if you want to play super aggro or whatever, getting those cards back is massive. So it's just a card you have to have 4 of. I like it, unless like it's just a must. The only con with it is just making sure your Don is equal to last. It only gets tricky in the mirror matches, pretty much. So definitely in the mirrors, pay attention to your opponent's Don so you can bring in Ray and get the effectiveness out, because you don't want it to be just a kind of like a dead card in your hand, because it's such a good card. Again, you just drop it and you get 2 cards. it's so strong with how important like card draw is in this game, because again, the games normally only go like 5-6 turns, like on average when you're playing with Law, and those 2 extra cards are just absolutely massive. So Ray is just a absolute must need. Alright, and then on to the boys, which is Shachi and Penguin. With them, again, early game, they are the most optimal ramp that you're going to get, because bringing them off in Law's ability is going to give you 2 back. And efficiency wise, that's the best you can do. And you just have to make sure you're under 3 Don, so you're able to bring them in off a lot of combos. Like, especially you play around like having a 6 Don, you're able to bring them in, get yourself going, and they just get the momentum going great. Early game, being able to bring them in, especially if you're able to drop like a Bon Clay. If you're going second, let's say, and then turn 2 you drop Bon Clay, use leader ability, bring in the boys, you're going to be back, you're getting just 6 Don on turn 3, like either way, which is crazy. Like efficiency, you getting 2 characters and then not losing any Don is nuts. Also, they're 2k counter, so if you are playing with more Don, you play a little slower, get your Don built up, then they just become the 2k counter in your hand, so then you can focus on playing it more aggressively with the other characters and not having to make sure you're like backing up your Don so much. The only con is to get their effect, you have to bring them in off the leader ability, because that's the only time you're going to be less than 3 Don is bringing them in. But yeah, besides that, absolute staple of Law. And yeah, that'll do it for what I believe the core is. Again, Kid Killer you need probably 4 of. Gordon, Max, anywhere for me 6 to 8. So 6, 7, and 8. Bon Clay 4, Kid 4, Ray 4, and then the boys 4. Alright, so now that you put together the core of the deck, what do we do with all the other slots there? So this is some of the cards that I brought up that you can put in, mix and match, and do something like that. And we'll get in at the end. This is not, don't feel like this is being locked in. This is, to me, just the best kind of cards that you can use right now with the ability of the core. But again, a lot of the cards, some of them are hard to get. So at the end, we'll get into all the other stuff you can use, because this is not a lock-in. Don't feel like if you can't get these cards that you are like out of luck and the deck's unplayable. You can still make other things work, and we'll get to that here at the end. But yeah, let's jump into the first one. We're just going to go like top row, right to left, and into another new EB01 card, Chopper. Chopper is pretty cool, and the reason why I think he might not be as usable right now because of stinky Sakazuki, because he's 3 cost, and Sakazuki is just like bulletproof deck right now with the double searches and stuff, and can remove like everything. It's really not ideal, but Chopper on the board in a lot of other matchups is very, very strong, because being able to combo Chopper with some other stuff, Chopper's ability, you put 2 Don on him if you're attacking, is great, I think, after like experimenting. And as things go in OP07 becomes a card you can definitely use in OP07, because Chopper's kind of like a double removal. You put 2 Don minimum. I'd say put 3 if you can. Put 3 and attack for 7, because if you attack an opponent's like rested character, or attack them directly if you want, then you get to minus 3,000 to any of the characters on the board. So basically, you could use Chopper to remove 2 characters. If they have something rested and something active, you can attack with Chopper, the rested one, and then use Chopper's ability minus 3,000 on the active one. Get rid of 2 characters, which is nuts. That is super, super strong. And yeah, that's why Chopper is pretty solid. Again, the only cons with Chopper right now is because he's so low cost, and 4,000 like rested. Pretty easy to remove if your opponent, especially again Sakazuki in EB01, is probably going to be used a lot, because again, it's just a bulletproof deck. They have like no weaknesses. It's pretty annoying. But against everyone else though, Chopper is pretty solid, and you'll be able to use, especially in the future once Sakazuki's gone and we get to OP07, Chopper is definitely usable. Alright, and then into the next optional card, Otama. So Otama is pretty solid, because it was pretty much a staple before Max came along for most of us, and Otama is still pretty good, I'd say, especially as a 2K counter option. Probably the best, because Otama's 1 cost, gives you that 2K power reduction, and is a 2K counter. So being able to use Otama is pretty good, especially against like a lot of the decks where their key cards are like 5,000 power. So against like Moria, stuff like that. The only disadvantage of Otama is it's only 2,000. So in the other matchups, like against Sakazuki and against Yellow and some of the other ones, the key cards in a lot of those matchups are 6,000 power. So whether that's Rob Lucci, whether it's the Sabo blocker, whether it's the Kiku, the yellow card with the trigger that restores life, any of those cards is where Otama is a bit out of range. But a lot of the other cards, again, Otama in a pinch can help you out. Even if you can't get rid of a 6K, if they're rested, you could throw down an Otama and attack to make sure you can still get the board control going. But besides that, Otama, 2K counter, and is very, very nice. On to Sanji. So Sanji is a 2 cost and also a 2K counter. So another option for 2K counters if you're looking. And the pros of Sanji is when you use his ability, you're going to be attacking for 7K after all is said and done. Great against NL, because NL's main strat against us, at least it used to be. It's a little bit harder for them to do now since we have card drawing cards like Ray and stuff like that. But Sanji was able to get you out of life range. So what you want to do against yellow a lot of times is get your life down to about 2. So that way they can't just drop their Gadatsus and Yamatos and just pop any card that you have in the field based on like the life. So that's where Sanji comes in help. Again though, the biggest con in Sanji is pretty much only used ideally in those matchups, because a lot of the other matchups is a lot tougher to play around like life stuff, and he's really easy for any other move decks to get rid of because he's at 2. So if you drop him, you probably get cleared pretty quick. But in a pinch, again, if you need to go super aggro, Sanji is going to get you that 7k attack if you use the ability to take the life. So can be pretty strong, but again, it just depends on like your environment and your matchups. Next up, we have what a lot of other people consider one of the key cards, but that is Zoro. And why Zoro is optional to me is because with the addition of Kid Killer, if you do not want to go like super aggro, you do not need Zoro anymore, because a lot of times how we use Zoro to begin with was just kind of situational and is a late game finisher. So that Kid Killer is just much more efficient. But if you want to go super aggro with Rush, Zoro and Kid Killer combo is absolutely deadly in a lot of matchups. Being able to drop Zoro, again, he's going to be Rush. And you're able to do such a super cool, fun, like end game finisher with Kid Killer now is you could drop Zoro and then use the leader ability. Those 3 down that you used to drop Zoro, bring in Kid Killer. And now you have 2 additional attackers for 3 Don, and one of them is going to be 7k. It's nuts. It's super fun and satisfying to pull off the new Zoro Kid Killer Barrage finisher. And yeah, the only con for running Zoro, and the reason some people dial him back, again, I feel like same with Gordon Max for Rush. You could run just like 6, just put in like 2 Zoros, because if you run too much like Rush cards, the biggest con of them is they don't have counter. So if you have too much of that and you get that in your hand, it puts you in a bad spot where you can't defend anything and you could lose board control. Because a lot of the times too, you don't want to go too aggro too early, because if you drop Rush too early in the game, your opponent is just going to attack the Rush characters, and that can put you in a tough spot because you could lose the board control. And if you try to defend any of the like rested Rush characters, you lose cards from your hand. So if you do that too early, you could get put in a spot where you can get hand starred. But besides that, Zoro is a ton of fun and is a great card to use if you want to. Alright, and then on to the core of the control playstyle of RP Law, which is Ace. So Ace is insanely strong if you're able to get to him and play him like effectively and efficiently, because Ace is 7 cost, 7k. You drop Ace, you get to give minus 3,000 to 2 characters. And why that is super strong is if you time it right, you're able to minus 3,000 to arrested, minus 3,000 to an active. 2 characters are just going to be gone off the board. And a lot of the times you drop Ace, your opponent is not going... If your opponent can't get rid of Ace like by removal stuff the next turn, Ace is going to do insane damage to them. And because, again, 7k attack, most decks in the game are very weak to 7k attacks, and Ace is just very nuts in that regard. And you're able to do the combo of dropping a Bond Clay or an Ain turn 2, get yourself to 5 Don, and then you can drop Ace turn 3 if you're going second, which is just an absolutely like nuts like thing that you're able to do. Getting Ace just set up is just so strong. But again, the cons to Ace is it does cost 7, and so if you like playing very aggro with Law's ability, you're probably not going to like playing with Ace, like honestly, because you do have to be a bit slower to get him set up, because again, you have to get to 7 Don, and if you're playing using Law's ability a lot, you're not going to get to 7 Don very consistently. And the other downside, again, similar to the Rush cards, is just no counter. So that's where things get a little tricky with deciding what kind of playstyle you want to play around, because with Ace and like Zoro, Kid, and Killer, they don't have counter. So you don't want to go too much, again, non-counter, so you can't be able to counter out anything, any attacks or anything like that. But again, Ace is just super strong. In the mirror match, Ace can just straight up win you the mirror, because again, you can, if you delete 2 characters, your opponent then has to use like normally at least 2 cards to be able to get rid of Ace, and if they can't, Ace is attacking for 7k, which Law is very, very weak to. because cards are so important to us. If your opponent's able to attack for 7k and you have to get rid of 2 cards to protect from that, that is not good, because every card is super important that's in our hand. Everything kind of plays a role, and if you lose those cards under your hand, you lose your options in the game. Alrighty, and then on to Shariah, one of the newer cards, probably one of the best blockers in the game, honestly, because Shariah's ability is crazy. Shariah's ability becomes the same attack power as your opponent's leader. So in a lot of matchups, especially Luffy and Yamato now, their leaders are going to be supercharged. They're trying to attack for a lot. So Shariah just becomes the same as their leader, and that means you only have to drop a 1k counter to counter out of any high leader attacks, which is nuts. So you're able to use Shariah. Again, the Black Yellow Luffy, they're going to be ramping up themselves to like 9k like attack as a leader minimum. So they're going to be attacking you for normally 11 with the 2 on. You're then able to block out of 11k attack with Shariah with just losing 1 card from your hand. And flip side of that is when you use Shariah to then attack, becomes the same base power of your opponent's leader. So you're playing against Black Yellow Luffy, they're at 9k. Shariah is then a 9k attacker. So if you're going for game on them, or like whatever you're trying to do, it's just so strong. The only cons with Shariah in other matchups like Sakazuki, pretty easy for them to get rid of because 3 cost, and after you do attack with Shariah, becomes 4k rested. So pretty normally easy for your opponent to get rid of. But besides that, again, if you're playing against a bunch of Black Yellow Luffys and Yamatos, stuff like that, Shariah will straight up just win you that matchup. If you're able to get Shariah early, you just win. So that's why Shariah is very, very good and one of the best blockers in the game. Then on to the promo law. This card is pretty strong because if you're going second and stuff like that, you're able to drop this card right away and normally be able to delete something off in your opponent's field if they did drop anything. And being able to just drop it, getting them -2000 saves you a lot of stuff later on with not having to use like a Gordon Max if you're able to do that. Or again, dropping this, and if your opponent has a rested card, -2000 can set up a bunch of stuff like that. So basically it saves you that Don of Gordon Max or Otama and stuff like that, so you can then play a little bit more aggressive. The main cons of this card is currently it's very hard to get because it's super expensive, because it's just a random promo from the movies and stuff. It is getting a reprint, but the reprint isn't coming until like June. So if you're looking to play it right now, that's, again, you still have like a month, so it's be kind of tough. And also it's pretty ugly looking. Like, it's not a very like appealing looking card. The reprint is pretty cool once that gets here, but again, for right now, that's where the weird middle ground. With how expensive this card is, if you don't already like have some and aren't fully committed to like playing around it, I'd say just wait until like the reprint comes, because it's, I feel like, not worth it. Especially once OP07 comes, you can easily play with like out it, if or just using like 2. Like, you definitely don't need, with how all the other cards that we're going to be getting and play styles and stuff around that, you can definitely make do without it. But at least right now, it is one of the strongest cards that you can put in this deck in the current format. So it is very, very good, just because of the -2000 power and not have to worry about needing to drop like a Gordon Max or anything like that first. Alright, then on to Kamazo. This card is pretty solid because one of the better 2k counters, in my opinion, that you can run in Law, because again, it's a 2k counter, and you can play him. His 4 cost 5,000, which is very good, and he's very strong against Sakazuki in particular. That's the reason why we mostly run him, because again, Sakazuki is able to drop so many of their searchers, and why it's so annoying to play them is because they can throw out the 1 cost Tashigi searchers and brand new searchers, because they search each other and stuff like that too, so they could get a bunch out. And the reason why that is a hindrance in Sakazuki is Sakazuki has a card called the Hound Blaze, which is an event card that they're able to then drop to boost up any leader or character by 3,000. So if they have a bunch of searchers out, they can then boost them up and attack us twice very early in the game, while also removing things, which is very tricky. And because, again, with our leader ability, we're only removing 1, so if Sakazuki is able to flip the board out with all these like search cards and like search characters, it using Kamazo to delete those so they can't attack you twice in a turn can win you that matchup just straight up. Because a lot of Sakazukis, that's their game plan, to be able to get cards out of our hand. Because in that matchup, cards are so... we need cards in hand to be able to keep up with how efficiently they're able to remove things now and also bring things out. So being able to bring out Kamazo and just delete and maintain board control is very strong. And also against green, because all the green decks and stuff like that run the continuous searchers. So being able to pop them while still attacking with like leader and stuff is very strong, especially against like Perona. Because I know a lot of people are trying like the Wano Perona build and stuff like that, and Perona is pretty strong against us. But if you have Kamazo, so they can't do their chains on all those like search character cards with the event and stuff like that, you can pretty much torch Perona. So that's why Kamazo is pretty strong. And then yeah, the main con and the other matchups, like our other main matchups again, like NL and the yellow, Kamazo don't really need because they don't run any kind of like low cost cards like that. So that's where Kamazo mostly in those matchups become a 2K, but it is a very versatile card. Then on to Queen, again one of the cards a lot of people like to use in this deck. The main problem with it is it's just expensive. It's hard to get because it's in a starter deck, so pretty obscure. But the pros of Queen is similar to Kid, is going to be a 6-hit blocker, and again, especially in the those yellow matchups, Queen not going to be able to get removed off of Gadatsu or Yamato, and also in removal matchups harder to remove because at 5. But being the 6K, again, it means like the yellow decks can't drop their boss cards and then attack you with the leader, and you again get to save a card in hand. And Queen gives you the card draw. So in a lot of people that like to use Law's ability a lot, this card is pretty good because being able to replenish your hand and to get cards that you may need is huge, especially again if you're using Law's leader ability a lot. You're going to be able to be built up in hand. So being able to combo this with Ray can be super strong. But then the other con is you do have to pay a Don to use it. So if you go too aggressive, you could lose 4 Don in one turn, which is not ideal. But playing around, just getting the card draw is very, very strong. On to Ain, which was basically Bon Clay before Bon Clay. So Ain is kind of the worst version of Bon Clay because Bon Clay gives you the active, Ain you get arrested, and also Ain has no counter. So that's the biggest hindrance of Ain. But being able to use Ain, again, especially if you want to use Ace, having Ain in Bon Clay increases your chances of being able to go second, drop Ain or Bon Clay turn 2, and then that means you get to drop Ace turn 3. So it's still super strong because, again, Ain is a good card because unconditionally you're always getting arrested on. Whether you drop Ain first or if you bring Ain in off leader ability, you're getting arrested on, which is very, very good. Because again, Ain is similar to Bon Clay. You're able to drop them first and then use leader ability, and then you could bring in Ray to get 2 cards early or bring in anyone else off in them, versus the other ramp cards where you have to bring them in off in leader ability. But yeah, the biggest con with Ain is just no counter. So again, if you're running very aggro with a lot of rush and stuff, you don't want too many cards without counter because it just leads you to the problem where you can't play defense. Alright, and then on to the search option of Buena Festa that you can potentially run. Some people do love searches, and because searches again take away some of the RNG aspect of the game because it allows you to look through those 5 cards and be able to pick something yourself. So then you get the information of, again, the cards you're sending to your bottom of your deck and what you're able to get and what your odds and stuff are going to be. The main sort of deterrence for Buena, though, is you do have to commit to a more of a film build. So you do need to run a good ratio of film cards, which for me, just a quick breakdown. If you run at least 18 film cards, since Buena searches 5, and out of those 5 cards, again, it varies at the stage of the game and how many film cards you've seen and stuff like that. But if you run 18, if we're just going raw, like off the top of the deck of 50, you have a 90% chance of drawing 1 film card from just those 5. So that's what I normally do. Like, you can look it up, I think pretty easy now, of like a hyper geometric calculator if you want to do like card draw statistics easily. I definitely recommend that for any kind of like deck building, especially if you're using a search. It's just finding, for me, the 90% is where I'm comfortable. For you, it could be different. If you may want like more, you might want a higher chance of hitting. You may be feeling more risky, you may want to drop it down. If you drop it down like to 16, I believe that's 85% chance. So you could go even more risky. Again, it's up to you if you like the comfort of the search, because Buena is also super cool because it's 2K counter. Like, that's very, very great. And being able to have that option of playing Buena when you need like a card, when you need a Gordon or Max, or when you need the Shiraya and you're playing Luffy and Yamato and you need Shiraya, being able to play Buena as a bailout to get those is very strong, because then when you don't need, it's just 2K counter in hand, which is cool. And then, yeah, the main con that most people are against Buena is because it's sort of like a superstition thing where, because again, the other 4 cards when you search are going to the bottom of your deck. So a lot of people, it's a big feels bad man moment when you do that and you see like a Kid and Killer or your 5-cost Kid or Ray, like those cards, and then you send those, especially if you need one of those. But I mean, it's sort of like you don't know what those 5 cards are going to be though. So like the flip side of that is if you don't see Ray or Kid and Killer in those, like the 5 cards, that means you're now closer to being able to draw them, which is like again, then to some people is a pro of running this card. But yeah, the biggest other thing, again, you just have to make sure you have a good ratio of film cards if you are going to run a search. All right, and then on to Blocker Law, which is, for me, a card I run at 2 because I really like Blocker Law in a lot of matchups. Again, against like a lot of the top decks in the game right now are playing around running more than, like, getting more than 7 cards in their hand. So I like Blocker Law running, again, for me personally, 2 of, because is a blocker, which is great, and timed right gets to trash 2 cards. And in a lot of matchups, again, if you're playing like Black Yellow Luffy, even Sakazuki, stuff like that, depending on the RNG, the 2 cards that you choose to trash, that could just straight win you the game. If you trash an 8-cost Moria from your opponent's hand, you could that might just win you the game straight up. And that's a little bit of the fun aspect of this. The cons, though, again, you have to pay a Don to activate the ability. So depending on the stage of the game, could be put you in a little bit of a tight spot. And then if your opponent does not have at least the 7 cards in hand, it's just a vanilla blocker, so you can't really do anything like that. So that's kind of the downside of it. But again, I don't know, for me, also on the flip side, in IRL, if you're playing, using the Blocker Law, like, even if you don't run it, is a great card to bluff your opponent into certain moves. Like asking your opponent how many cards they have in hand. If your opponent has 6, and you ask them, this is like, again, the only card that does this, where you have to have 7, at least 2, you can then bait your opponent into trying to, like, sack cards from their hand to defend, so they don't lose the 2 from Blocker Law. A lot of people will play around that, because then if you do have it and then they don't, they get to 7, you drop Blocker Law, then 2 cards are out of their hand. So either way, they're going to be getting to 5 cards in hand. So being able to like bluff around Blocker Law is also very, very helpful, and something I probably, I don't know, you could do IRL if just asking your opponent how many cards they have in hand, and if they're at 6, get them to go down to 5 either way. Either them countering out, or if they take the hit, then you drop Blocker Law, then they're going to lose 2. Next, we got Beppo, which has been a staple for a lot of people. A lot of people love running our bear friend, because can be very strong and gives you the 1 Don when you bring in off the ability, and has the continuous when attacking ability. So if you're able to keep Beppo on the field, you're going to be getting an extra Don back basically every turn you're able to attack. But the biggest problem, and why Beppo, in my opinion, is now like optional, is because with the addition of Bon Clay, and if you run Ain, depending on your build, like Beppo, you have to be under Don. Like, you have to have less Don than your opponent to be able to get the Don back. Where again, Bon Clay and Ain is unconditional. You always will get a Don. So with Beppo, you have to be less than your opponent, and depending on your playstyle and stuff like that, that may be like not very great. Maybe put you at a disadvantage if you're needing to be under. But if you're playing pretty aggressive and needing to get Don back, protecting Beppo on the field can be pretty strong. But it also, the reason why Beppo is optional is just because with the addition of Bon Clay, the early game combos of being able to drop a Bon Clay or Ain and then go into literally anything is so much stronger, where Beppo, you have to bring in off an ability early game. So you wouldn't be able to drop Ray early if you need cards. because you have to get yourself lower before you can then do that. Versus, again, Bond Clay and Ain, you could drop Bond Clay turn 2 and then bring in Ray if you desperately need better cards on hand. So stuff like that is where you can't use Beppo, but Beppo is very, very strong if you combo Beppo with like a Chopper or with a Shariah with the 5-cost kid. Being able to have 2 characters out with continuous abilities puts your opponent in a weird spot where they have to decide what to get rid of and what to leave you with. So that's where Beppo, again, can be pretty strong. It just depends on your deck build and your playstyle. Then on to some events. First up, we got Radical Beam. This card is just very good because it blocks for 4K, it gives you 4K defense, and that can win you a game, just straight up. Being able to stop your opponent from attacking a character at a crucial time, being able to protect yourself, again, at a crucial time is massive, and with the addition of Bond Clay, along with the 5-cost kid we already have, being able to get that active down back to set you up for being able to play Rad Beam is massive. It opens up some more combos that you're able to do, and just be able to keep that board control. But if your opponent tries to attack anything, you're able to then use Rad Beam and pretty much protect anything depending on the stage of the game when your opponent attacks, which is great. Then the only cons with it is you do have to have that active down at the end of your turn, so depending on the info and stuff given, your opponent will potentially know that you have that in your hand. And again, you need to play around having the Don if you don't have a way to bring in the Bond Clay, or if you don't have a kid set up. You have to play around keeping the 1 Don up. And then just in hand, if you aren't able to do that, then it's kind of a dead card. So that's the only other con. But again, it's very, very strong. It also has the trigger. If you get off the life, depending on the timing, you can give yourself plus 1,000, which could straight up win you the game if your opponent only is attacking for the 5K. So you can do stuff like that. But again, it's a very, very strong card, and if you want to have some extra protection, I would recommend it. But again, not needed depending on your overall playstyle. Then we have the other main event card I would recommend, especially again if Gordon and the promo law and stuff like that, if price is a major concern for you, then I recommend this card because it is a very good card. It's very strong against the black decks that run Rebecca, because end game you're able to pop Rebecca and still minus 4,000, which is again a big plus. You get to minus 4,000 with this card, which then puts all 7,000 or less in range now, which is pretty strong, and you're able to just do a bunch of other stuff with it. And it has a trigger where you get to activate the main ability, so depending on the timing, if your opponent's going for game, being able to hit this minus one of your opponent's characters that haven't attacked yet by 4,000 can straight up win you the game and stuff like that, depending on if you do hit the life lottery in that regard. But the biggest con is it's just not very efficient if depending on how you like to play. If you like to play super aggro, it's kind of tough to use this card because you got to use 2 for it versus again the Otamas, the Gordon, the Maxes, where you just got to drop 1. And playing around the 2, especially depending on how you like to play, can kind of hurt you. So you just have to play with a little bit higher down range. Normally, in general, I'd say the most efficient range is keeping between 5 and 7. But if you're playing with Fire Fist, you probably want to you're in the 6-7 range, where just in case you need to drop the 5-cost kid and then you want to use Fire Fist to remove something to play it safe, stuff like that. But it is, again, a very, very strong card, especially if you're playing against a lot of decks that run the Rebecca blocker. Being able to just pop Rebecca and then still being able to delete something off your opponent's field can change the outcome of the game. But again, it also just depends running this card again with your other power reduction, because it's finding the balance there, and we'll get into that with the overall deck tips here in a second. But yeah, Fire Fist, especially if price is a concern to you, I definitely recommend getting this card. If you can't get the Gordons or promo laws, picking up this card is perfectly fine in my opinion. I don't think again, you just have to play around a little bit better. Versus you can't play as wild as free with the other cards. But it's still minus 4,000 is big, and if you're playing into the mirror and your opponent drops Ace, that card is way better to be able to drop to get rid of Ace than having to stack 2 Gordons or something like that. So that is yeah, Fire Fist, and yeah. All right, so that is of my optional recommendation cards, but that don't feel like you're locked into the cards you see on screen though. Like I mostly just left it like this because it's symmetrical. I'm not being honest, but you can, again, there's so many other cards you can add into Law. You just add your own personality, like straight up. That's my biggest outside of finding the playstyle that works for you. Add cards that you like straight up. Add cards that like is your own thing, that's your own personal signature. Like if you like for example, Luffy right here, throwing in 1 or 2 copies of the 5-cost Luffy if you want to like be able to have like a gotcha card that your opponent wouldn't expect, you totally could do. Or if you want to run film but you can't, like, again, the price option of promo Law is an issue, but you like having a search, there are other film options you can run. Saga is very, very strong. Being, again, another 2k counter, and being able to combo Saga, especially if you drop Buena, using Saga's ability, putting 1 Don, you're having a 7k attacker, and then you get just delete Buena at the end of your turn, so you keep Saga on the field. That's crazy strong. There's also other cards you could add. Again, Uta Blocker is pretty strong. -1, you get to rest up to any of your opponent's characters with cost 5 or less. That's massive because that's basically every top deck in the game. Their main blockers are 5 costs or less. So being able to do that can just win you a game just straight up by resting your opponent's blockers so you can attack them directly. But again, you can, picking your theme, your play style, don't feel locked into the cards that I've told you. Like there is plenty of other cards that you can run. Like again, you want to do a Heart Pirates theme, you can try stuff like that. You just need to be cognizant of, again, sort of the overall ratios, which I'll get into a second. But yeah, you could run Gamma Knife if you want. You want to run Search Law, play around the Heart Pirates theme. You can do stuff like that. Like, don't feel locked in, like, ever, depending on the builds you see from me or, like, literally anyone else. Like, build around, again, like, your own personal kind of budget and stuff and what you're able to do. And then build around just what you like. The cards and the playstyle that you like to do is very, very strong. And, again, there's just a lot of options outside of the ones I've just shown you here too that you're able to do. So don't feel locked in to any specific build, because what's successful for someone with RP Law won't be successful for you. And like flip side, because how I play Law is from my own personal perspective, and what I see, the combos I put together, like you might not see, and then when you're playing the deck and the combos and stuff you see, I probably won't see. So it's like building around how you kind of think is sort of like the staple thing for me for RP Law, and that's kind of like where it gets it's kind of hard in that regard too, because you have to kind of experiment around making small adjustments, like +1 to 1 card, -1 to a card. Like, just making small adjustments can also change big things in your deck too. So don't feel like again that you're locked in any like specific build that you see me use, stuff like that. Add your own little personality to the deck. Like, just have fun. Just straight up, again, all these cards that are red and purple, I mean, some of them I obviously can't use, but there's a bunch of funny little cards you can add. Like, what's the other one that we're getting? Yeah, this guy, Mino Chihuahua. This is another Rush. You can go crazy with Rush. Again, this comes in off leader ability, and it's another Rush card that you could use. So don't feel, again, locked into anything. You can get very creative with Law, finding your own, again, your own flair, your own style that stands out. If that's important to you, like, feel free. So, again, outside, these are just my recommendations of cards that I like to use and have found the most success with, just personally, and playing around with that. But again, a lot of the other cards, there's a lot of other options that you can do depending on your own budget and stuff like that. So you're definitely not locked in, and yeah. So let's get into, we'll wrap things up. I'll go into just some general kind of like tip stuff for my personal deck building, and yeah. Alright, so let's hop into some more kind of final quick deck building thoughts here. And I want to start off with your environment. So what I mean by this and why this is such a crucial thing is because RP Law is kind of like an anti-deck. You can tech in special cards depending on what you see at your locals, what your friends may be running, to be able to give you a better chance against their decks. So depending on again, what you see at your locals and stuff, that can also influence, and I think should influence what you put in your deck. Again, if you see a bunch of NLs, putting in the 2-cost Sanji to make sure you can't get like shut down by their Gadatsu Yamato kind of like cycle, stuff like that. Or if you have a lot of Sakazuki, putting in the rush Doros to make sure you can rush them down early, and make sure you have like the rush to go for the game once they get things set up and they're deleting everything, wiping your board. So stuff like that, adjusting numbers around certain things that you're playing again in your environment, I think is super important. And just putting cards in that give you better chances against specific decks, especially when you know you're going to be seeing that deck over and over again at your locals or your friends, is very important when it comes to building RP Law. Just setting your expectations of what your goals are with the deck, and just building around the decks that you are going to see the most, and making sure you can put yourself in a position to have the cards that you need to win those matchups as much as you can. Okay, so getting into Law and some general tips of just, especially if you're new to the game and new to playing Law, is things that I look for, some like the operating ranges that can definitely help you out, especially if you feel like you're using the ability too much or even too less, like depending on your Don stuff. For me, finding like the balance of like your Don operating window is kind of like the most important thing, and things that you can look for, especially if you're new and looking to play off and things with Law. So I just got like a standard build on the screen. We got the sort of like a rush down build. But playing in like this build, for example, 5 to 7 Don is the Don operating window. So depending on your build and the cards that you have, finding your Don operating window is very important. And why I say 5 to 7 is because 5 for me is the minimum of, especially this build, being able to hit combos of your 4 costs and your 1s. So being able to drop like a 4 and then still making sure, like if you're running it with 5, that you can still remove something and still be able to play stuff, you know? So that is, for me, 5 is like the minimum of the Don operating window. And then all the way up to kind of 7. The most optimal, though, is keeping yourself at 6. So being able to, especially going into turn 3, being able to drop Kid for 5 and then still removing something with a Gordon or a Max is huge. Or even Otama, you know? So being able to keep yourself at 6 just keeps you in that flex range of being able to, again, drop your 5 cost, remove something, or just being able to attack consistently for like the 7Ks and then still removing stuff if you need to do that. It's just that for me, 6 is probably like the peak number, but it depends on your build. If you're playing Ace, it's easier to keep yourself get to 7, and then it's easier to stay at 7 once you play around that, especially if you have Kid and stuff like that. But yeah, biggest pro tips. Again, the Don, you can minus from anywhere. It really opens up all the combos and stuff. And then finding, based on your deck build and what you're running, like your most efficient Don operating window is huge. Because then, like for me, again, using 6 as an example, for the math in my head when I'm playing, I'm trying to make sure that I'm going to get back to that 6 once we get to turn 3 and like so on. Being able to consistently get back to that 6 Don is massive, because again, it allows me to play the blockers and then bring in anything, or being able to attack for more consistently. So that's, for me, my own personal thought process for that. And yeah, finding what your deck build around is, like if you have the events and stuff like that too, may change. Especially again, Fire Fist, you probably want to be at 7, just so you Fire Fist and bring in a 5 cost potentially. But again, 6 in any build, because even if you're running Fire Fist, being at 6, you can still drop a 4 cost, or like again, even like the 3s is still very nice. So yeah, it just depends on your build again, but that's the numbers I look forward to when I'm playing. So in my Don zone, if I can keep myself again in that 5 to 7 range consistently, I'm probably going to have a good result. So that is my tip for using the Don ability. Just try to find a range that your deck works best at, which depending on the cost of characters in your deck, you can kind of narrow it down, and then just practice getting yourself into that range and see how you get there, whether that is playing slower to get up there, or if you are then playing too slow, you could then play a little quicker to get yourself like down if you're feeling like you're not playing efficiently enough. But at least for me, that's the number I look for. All right, and then into some real nerd stuff right here is using calculations to build your deck. Building around the core, again, we have the core set up, so depending on what you run there, like 26, 28 cards already set up and stuff like that. But by what I mean by using calculations is sort of similar to the philosophy of the search, the search with where I was saying earlier, where running 18 gives you 90% chance of one of those 5 cards being that. Using those same calculations and stuff like that, you can then kind of reverse engineer it to kind of getting an estimate of what you're going to get in your hand and your percentages of like draws and stuff like that. So what I mean by that is optimally, I'm just going to go like starter numbers. After the core, you want, I feel like, safe the at least 10 2K counters. Any like minimum, I'd say, unless you want to play crazy aggro, you need, that's probably like the safe range especially if you're new. But then you can change around that. You can go more, you can go less. But and then the next thing, what is called like the bricks, you don't want, I feel like, any more than 18 in the deck. And what a brick is, if anyone's like new, is the cards that don't have counter. So if you have too many of these in your hand, that means you're not going to be able to play any kind of defense. So that means you're going to, anything on your board, your opponent's going to be able to hit, get rid of, and or if they just attack you and you have no counter in hand, if you're running too many cards that don't have counter, your opponent's just going to be able to hit you for the 5Ks, and there's nothing you can do about it. So for me, I feel like no more than 18 of those cards is the most optimal, and why I mean 18 is same thing for the search. If again, we have 50 cards, so if you have 18 of them that do not have counter, if you shuffle your deck, you draw 5 cards, you have a 90% chance of one of those 5 being a card without counter. So for me, that is sort of the comfortability of it. That's like the maximum, but again, it's your personal preference. Just play around the numbers. You can, again, use hard calculations and stuff if you want to know your drawing statistics of where you're going to be at. And you can use that, again, you can use that for 2K counters as well. You can use that for card draw if you want to play around the numbers of like Ray and Queen. You can use it for ramp if you want to make sure you have enough ramp. Again, using like the hypergeometric calculator to, if you want to get really nerdy with it and breaking down these absolute like fine point statistics of your deck and you're like drawing probabilities, you can do that. And that is kind of what I do with the, I mean, sometimes, I don't know, it's just fun putting stuff together, but if you want to get to just the specifics, that is something I recommend doing, especially, again, making changes, dropping Gordons down. Because if you are running for a bunch of Otamas, you're running the promo law and stuff like that, making sure you don't have like too much power reducing, and especially just getting the reps and playing the game, kind of finding what you feel good with and what you like, and then you can just make adjustments, and then you have like a way to make like data comparisons, which is pretty cool. But yeah, my biggest tip though is do not feel locked in with any kind of law build. Find what fits your play style, whether like this one right here being super aggro with rush. Let's jump into the ace build that you saw in the previous video. Bang bang, running ace. If you like to run ace, you like control, you can do that. Or what's the other one we got? That ran chopper. So yeah, the chopper of our previous little 3 videos or intro videos. There you go. That's what pretty much why I did those first before getting into this. So I use those as examples of like different play styles that you can be successful with. Because again, the biggest thing with law is there's no like one thing. There's no one size fits all kind of thing where you have to commit and conform to a certain play style and like super specific cards. Outside of the core cards, I feel like, again, I've put so much time and stuff into this. I've honestly not noticed that big of a difference of like running like something super defensive like this or something super aggro. Like my results and stuff for like winning, losing have not substantially changed, at least for what I look for. So just finding whether, again, you like to play super aggro, you want to run 4 Zoro, 4 Kin Killer, you want to run 2 Zoro, 4 Kin Killer. Like it's totally up to you. Like stuff like that is totally up to you. And yeah, I feel like that's enough yapping. Hopefully, I don't know. I didn't want to go into like super detail, but I feel like I definitely yapped for a good bit. But I just wanted to cover everything, especially anyone that's new to Law, and just give my thoughts and kind of opinions on what I think of the deck, especially if you're new to the game, and the key cards, stuff like that. But yeah, RP Law, best deck in the game because, again, you have the freedom to be able to just build around what you want, which is so cool. There's no wrong build for RP Law because, again, you can just make everything work, and it's super fun. And it's just one of the more like challenging decks to use, and a lot of the in-game decisions. The reason why I like this, why I love Law, is a lot of your games are going to be different, and like you have to do different setups against certain opponents, stuff like that, which is super cool. And a lot of the other leader decks that you use, like they all do the same thing. Like they're all win conditions are the same, but why I love Law is like it's flipped. We win with Law by taking away the win conditions of other decks versus like other decks have to establish their setups to win. And I just love it because it gives you so much freedom to be able to do what you want and build around what you want, which is super cool. But yeah, enough yapping out of me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and yeah, I can't wait for the set to drop. I'm so excited. I really hope I got some packs like pre-ordered. I'm hoping I get this card. This is like the only card I care about getting is the Alt Art Kid Killer. If not, I'll probably, depending on the price, I might buy a couple. But yeah, I'm so super excited for Friday for this to come out. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.